So welcome everyone. Very good afternoon. So I would request all our audiences to mute your microphone so we can hear the guest speaker nicely. And also if you can turn your video off, just in case, I mean, you have not a better video quality. So today's CV, it's going to be about human factors and cybersecurity. And we have a really good guest speaker here, Dr. Jay Jeong. He's from Cybersecurity CRC, which is a part of Center for Cyber Resilience and Trust at Deakin University. He's a senior research fellow there, and he has been involved with the socio-technical aspects of cybersecurity. And I think it would be a great interest for our audience today. So just to give you a brief about our speaker, he has done his master's and PhD from University of Melbourne. He serves as a managing director of Elegant Minds, and he has been involved with a lot of startups as well. So that's a little bit background about Jay. And before beginning today's seminar, we would like to acknowledge the people of Woiwurrung and Wunwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of RMIT and the lands that I am speaking from today. We respectfully acknowledge the First Nation people of 5 Kulin nations, their ancestors, elders past, present, and emerging. RMIT also acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. So I would hand over to Jay. It would be usually 40 to 45 minutes of the session. And if you have your questions, feel free to put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask Jay after he finishes his presentation. So yeah, Jay, can you mind sharing your screen, please?
Sure.
Yep.
Right. So welcome, everyone. Many thanks for attending today's speech. It's always an honor to be able to share some of your research and some of your work with other colleagues from other institutions. And today's topic, as you can probably tell, is a truly interdisciplinary topic. So just a heads up that today is more about breadth than depth. It's to give you some understanding of the underlying background, the motivation behind a lot of the research, some of the interesting applications of human-centric cybersecurity in real-life practice, and some of the projects I am currently involved in applying this research as well. So did you know that and you can see that I've had to cross out because when I was going through the slides, I had to refresh many of the statistics involved. So now it's every 7 minutes a new cybersecurity incident is reported, down from 10 minutes in 2019. Cybercrime is now costing the Australian economy up to $3.5 billion annually in direct costs alone. So that figure has tripled over the last couple of years as well. 89% of Australian organizations reported being breached in the past 12 months. Over 500,000 or 500,000 Australian small businesses fell victim to cybercrime in 2017. 2020, the Victorian Police reported that over close to 3 million individuals had been a victim of cyber-dependent crime as well. So this poses a really interesting question that despite the amount of resources, awareness, and the research that we put in the space, the trend tends to tell us that things are actually getting worse, not better. So, my angle of approach to that question is perhaps we have been focusing too much on the technical aspects without understanding that the root cause is actually human-centric. And the statistics actually prove this. So 82% of breaches currently involve some sort of human element, which may be social attacks, errors, and misuse. And this is an age-old saying by Alex Pope in his essay of criticism: to err is human. Humans will always make mistakes, and humans are always prone to error. That is something that no matter what type of technological solution you apply, errors are still going to be part of that process. And when we talk about errors in the context of cybersecurity, it refers to unintentional actions or lack of action by employees and users that cause, spread, or allow a security breach to take place. And it can be divided into or categorized into two major kind of differences. One is skill-based, so errors made when conducting routine tasks and activities. And the other is decision-based errors, where you actually make an incorrect decision at the time. And there are some slight differences between these two types of errors. So up the top, you see skill-based, where a lack of security common sense, clicking on an attachment that you should probably not be opening, or forgetting to lock your monitors or computer when you go on a toilet break, or if you're going on a lunch break, or just neglecting things where you can't be bothered changing your password, so use the same generic password across multiple sites. These are skill-based errors. Decision-based errors may be that you actually cause deliberate acts of negligence. So, using your own personal Dropbox folder to store sensitive corporate data or documents, or actually deliberately attacking your system, right? So abusing the system by trying to funnel money or embezzle funds out of the system, or selling information or data to third parties that you shouldn't be doing. So errors are prevalent in many of our organizations, and what we're noticing is that this is actually the root cause of many of the cybersecurity breaches that we currently face. To mitigate this, we've tried multiple approaches. There's very strict policies that are enforced. There's an inherent kind of overarching culture, or cybersecurity culture that is integrated into organizations. And then there is also training and awareness programs that are run by organizations on a consistent basis. And most of these are largely effective. And there are three main reasons why this is the case. The first one has got to do with cognitive dissonance. So what we know and what we do are two different things. For example, 80% of hacking-related breaches still involve compromised and weak credentials, and we don't have the necessary platform to do this. But think about your own situation or circumstance where do you use the same password in your instance across multiple sites? If multi-factor authentication is optional and not mandatory, do you use it? Interesting facts around passwords. 51% of people use the same passwords across both work and personal accounts. 71% use same passwords across multiple websites. 49% of people actually have their passwords written down on a piece of paper. 50% haven't changed their passwords in the past 5 years. And 23 million users still use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as their password. I'm assuming if you take a digit off and put a digit on top of it, you'll have an exponential number of users added to that 23 million in the mix. So just ask yourself, does any of these apply to you? And if so, why? Because you clearly know that passwords are, creating secure, safe passwords using phrases, passphrases, or a combination of numeric and alphabetical variants, and selecting different password for different sites is probably the most critical aspect of cybersecurity that you can carry out as an individual. But most of us tend not to. So this is what we're implying by cognitive dissonance, or what we know and what we do are two completely different things. And this is because a lot of our use behavior around cybersecurity is actually driven by attitude. It's not based on knowledge. It's our attitude towards what we have to do. And our attitude is determined by 4 constructs. One is performance expectancy, second is effort expectancy, third is social influence, and the final is facilitating conditions. For the sake of time, I won't go through these 4. It's written on the screen. I'll have these slides available to share so you can actually have a look at what each of those constructs actually imply. But the key point here is what we do or how we react or behave is mostly based on our attitude towards a specific specific thought process or a specific action. The second reason why a lot of our attempts to address the human-centric aspects of cybersecurity is because users all have a very different set of usage patterns with carrying varying levels of digital risk. So in one of our studies, we did a literature synthesis of what are some of the human factors that apply or affect how we are exposed to cybersecurity risk at a human-centric level. Personality, gender was actually a controversial one because there are certain studies that say it does matter, and then there are certain studies that say it doesn't matter. Seniority or experience, role, industry, age, education, and training. All of these facets actually have a direct implication on how much risk you face on a day-to-day basis. So for example, imagine if you're working in an organization where a large organization at a bank, and you are in the accounting department of that firm. The risks that you face in your role as an accountant within that bank is very different from the customer service representatives in the branches who deal with interactions with the customer on a face-to-face basis every day. Right? So although they're part of the same organization, the risks that they face on a day-to-day basis are completely different. And in many instances, the security policies or the education set of programs, which is security education training awareness programs that we enforce, is one size fits all. And this is going to be a common theme throughout today's entire presentation, that we often take a very simplistic approach when diagnosing or referring humans in this context of cybersecurity, whereas in fact, there are so many variables that you need to take into consideration. Interestingly enough, we did a study on this to see if there are patterns that emerge based on different user characteristics. And one thing that we found out is how we set up passwords, which is a common thing, and I've used passwords as an example because it's actually the most simplistic concept to grasp, is that how we set up passwords is also affected based on cultural elements. Again, the details of the study, I will be happy to share the publication. But basically what we're saying here is that based on your national culture, which is determined by power distance index, long-term orientation, individualism, many of you who are aware of cultural studies, that's based on Hofstede's dimension. Not all of Hofstede is applicable in this context. We identified 3 and determines the login strength. And how we set up login strength has a direct implication on a nation's cybersecurity maturity level. And we ran a fuzzy logic model and found a correlation, right? Based on national culture, people set up passwords differently, which actually directly affect the maturity level based on cybersecurity for a specific nation. Another study as a byproduct of this, as a follow-up study, is we analyzed around 7 billion passwords based on open access data. So as you can tell, these are the most common passwords across 3 different countries. And you're more than welcome to have a guess what the further left password is from, which country that is from. From France. The middle one is from Italy, and the one on the right is from the UK or Britain. So you can clearly see how we set up passwords is actually dependent on national culture factors as well. And certain countries have a tendency to set up much more stringent passwords comparative to other, which again affects the national maturity level of that country when it comes to cybersecurity. The final reason is cybersecurity is a broadly used term whose definitions are highly variable, often subjective, and at times uninformative. During my postdoctorate at Monash, I got a chance to work with the Oceania Cybersecurity Center based here in Melbourne and the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Center, which is Oxford University. And we examined the cybersecurity maturity levels of Pacific Island nations. And we ran a comprehensive focus group study, which involved a variety of different government, commercial, and education-related sector individuals working in cyber. And we understood that we quickly identified that how people perceive cybersecurity was very different based on their role, sector, and their experience. So, for example, when we asked a cohort or a group of people from one of these nations what their thoughts were on social media sites, you see up the top where the 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 study participant who was a male involved in policy making and was at an executive level decision from the government. He perceived cybersecurity as a cybersecurity threat. Sorry, he perceived social media as a cybersecurity threat. So the use of social media to put, is to spread rumors and sometimes probably make libelous or defamatory statements on the internet. And that is a major risk. So we need to somehow moderate and ensure that we create policies to be able to limit the spread of rumors and defamatory statements using social media. Whereas the same question around social media that was posed to a female executive in the telecommunications sector, and she was involved in ops, was saying, well, it's a resource to be consumed because social media, more people who use social media means that more data is pushed, which is directly involved with how much revenue or profit that's generated for the company. So their focus is, right, how do we make sure that we build up the infrastructure so that more people can actually use social media and thereby use more data? The final participant on the bottom, you can see, is just a regular employee from the public sector. It's just a way of us communicating with each other. It's just people wanting to connect and communicate. That's it. So even under the same even with the same subject matter, which is social media, based on an individual's own background and traits, how they perceive that in the context of cybersecurity changes dramatically. And that this again exemplifies that the one-size-fits-all approach to cybersecurity is probably flawed, because how we even define cybersecurity is actually very different from person to person and nation to nation. So again, the reason why our attempts of addressing the human-centric cybersecurity issues is because we've taken a one-size-fits-all approach, kind of basketed all humans into one basket. I've even heard cybersecurity experts say, well, if we take humans out of the equation, there will be no cybersecurity incidents. So we should try and involve as least amount of people as possible in the process. And with that type of thought process, we're going to constantly run into barriers. And again, this is my reason as to why I believe, despite the resources and all the amount of research that is being put into cybersecurity, we've actually had an adverse effect when it comes to outcomes and results. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my current projects and how that kind of intertwines with the background regarding the human-centric related issues or challenges that we faced. I'm currently working on 3 projects. One is looking at enhancing cyber insurance. The second one is looking at privacy enhancing technologies. And the third one is redefining usable security, what it implies by usability and security. I'll quickly go through this because I do really want to create a forum for everyone to chime in and share their thoughts and constructively criticize some of this work as well. So enhancing cybersecurity. So again, despite differences in risk factors across industries and sectors, the insurance industry continues to take a one-size-fits-all approach to cyber insurance. So on the right, you'll see that different industry sectors have a different amount of attacks that are carried out on a week-to-week basis. And the main driver of this, remember, is data. So the more valuable data you hold within the sector, the more likelihood an attack will occur within that industry sector. So for example, the data that you can obtain from a hardware vendor, probably limited in its value comparative to research data or education data, or even government and military data. So you see a correlation between the value of data and the industry sector as well. And what we're seeing is that you're recalling a dearth of data leads to a vicious circle in cyber insurance, that because cyber insurance is a relatively new insurance line, and there's no real historical credible data upon which to make reliant inferences about loss expectations, these are all kind of the risk modeling around cyber insurance is based on other more traditional industries, but we all know that the risk factors in cyber are completely different and a lot more complex than, say, for example, the risk modeling basis for car insurance or property insurance or business insurance. And what we're seeing is so we're seeing that there's a dearth where both premiums are going up for insurees, but the profit margins for the reinsurers is also going down at the same time. So it's getting more expensive, but it's actually leading to less profit for the insurers. So this is what we call the dearth of, or vicious circle of cyber insurance. So to respond to that, we've tried to increase the rates, and I've just implied that rate increases haven't worked. Coverage limitations, so making sure that your policy only covers specific aspects of cyber. Capacity constriction, greater underwriting scrutiny, all to try and limit the losses of the cyber insurance product in general. And on the right, it's been actually not effective. So on the right, I won't go through the financial kind of terminology, but what the graph on the right implies is that despite the average rate increase, the losses haven't dwindled. They've actually gone up at the same time. So more expenses, but more losses at the same time. So one project that I have been working on, and I'm not able to disclose the entity, but it's a fairly large insurance authority here in Australia, is we were involved in trying to gauge and identify cyber risk across different clientele bases, provide recommendations to measure and quantify cyber risk, and to provide ways to prevent harm if an incident occurred. So think about how, for example, workplace safety works and the OH&S, occupational health and safety sector works, that accidents within the workplace are inevitable, but there are policies, procedures, and regulations in place to make sure that if an incident occurs, the amount of harm that's caused or generated is mitigated or minimized. So if we're not able to address the human errors that occur, irrespective of the technological advancements that we put in place, then what we can try and do is minimize the harm when an incident occurs. So for example, if I click open up a attachment which has malware inside, how do we minimize the harm of that action across the entire organization or sector? How do we prevent that becoming a larger issue later down the track? So we worked with a government agency to be able to look into this in a little bit more detail. And what we did was we carried out a mixed method study involving 3 rounds of surveys, and then we did a Delphi study through 3 rounds. So for those who are not familiar with Delphi studies, consider an expert panel, that you ask a set of questions to an expert group of panels, and they deduce the answers until you get to a specific consensus over a set of criterias. And the report is finalized, and we should have that ready within the next couple of weeks, but these are just overarching results from that study. What we found is that organizations lack effective and well-defined cybersecurity policies and processes. So, across the board, there was a lack of being able to clearly define cybersecurity-related policies and procedures. And even if you did so, the enforcement of those policies and procedures were a completely different matter. So you didn't have the resources to enforce nor implement or go ahead with the policies and procedures that you had created. Basic security control mechanisms were lacking. Again, the survey was carried out across over 200 users across the entire Victorian public sector, which involved 4,000 different organizations. So basic security control services like antivirus, MFA, spam, and email phishing were considered really important, but only half of the organizations, for a matter of fact, had MFA enabled. And then you might be saying, well, why haven't they implemented MFA? And I can give you an example of this, and that was the same kind of notion that I had. That from our perspective, it's common sense to have two-factor authentication enabled, as it's just a gimme. But why haven't half of the Victorian public sector not have MFA enabled? So I'll give you an example of one of the participants was the State Library of Victoria, which is on the top of Swanston Street. They have 145,000 registered members at the library. And the CISO told us that they aren't able to implement MFA because 1/3 of their members do not have a smartphone. So by enabling MFA to their members, 1/3 of their users can't participate in the hiring and lending of books or accessing the site online. So there are a number of different reasons why that's the case, but our assumptions are generally not how things are in the real world. So again, it comes to that notion that one-size-fits-all approach is limited. This was quite interesting as well, where the most important cyber risk mitigation method across both the survey and Delphi study results was that security education training awareness was most effective. But again, only 3 in 10 organizations implement SETA as part of their cyber strategy. And those who actually implemented SETA, they said that it's the least effective cyber risk mitigation measure. So this took a bit of time to figure out why this might be the case. Okay, education training awareness is the most important, but yet, and a lot of organizations, invest a lot of resources into it because they consider it the most important, but it doesn't work. And this comes to the cognitive dissonance that we mentioned before and previously earlier in today's presentation, right? Where what we know and what we do are two different things. So think about the cybersecurity education training awareness programs that you have had to go through when going through the onboarding process at your current university or your workplace. Set of questionnaires, and in your back of your mind, you want it to be done as soon as possible so you can just tick it and forget about it. It doesn't actually lead to any changes in the underlying behavior that you need to address that issue or risk. An example that I use is that imagine having you have a friend who smokes cigarettes, and you give him or her a 45-minute spiel on why nicotine and smoking is bad for you. The first thing that person will do as soon as you shut up is go outside and have a smoke. Right? We can talk about passwords all day, but then if I told you, and everyone has this option in Google Chrome where it stores your passwords and it gives you a list of passwords that are safe or high risk. When I did it, I saw 240 passwords or sites at risk. I can't be bothered going through all of those passwords and changing it. I kind of had to force myself, well, Jay, you have to practice what you preach, so you have to do it, or you're going to be a hypocrite when you talk about this. But without that inherent motivation or drive, or the attitude towards changing that inherent behavior that we also covered very quickly in the previous slides, nothing changes. And this was the reason why SETA programs, despite it being considered one of the most effective harm prevention mechanisms, was actually in fact the least effective. So in the report, the recommendations were broken down into 7 recommendations. Again, I won't go through this too much, but we created a model of cyber maturity that was able to address the harm. And then for each of the 7 roadmap foundations or recommendations, we had a roadmap created for each initiative. And again, this should be available in the next couple of weeks, and I'm happy to share the link once it's available. And it's for those with time, it's an 82-page report. So you're more than welcome to find the details in there once it's publicly available and announced. Another project that I'm working on is looking at how on privacy issues pertaining to how users interact with the technology. When we talk about privacy, we often talk about it at a high level. When we talk of things about zero trust or differential privacy, etc. But what I'm looking at explicitly is privacy, a term I've coined, privacy by usage. And privacy by usage issues arise based on the decisions users make when interacting with a specific piece of technology. So one thing that we looked at is digital wallets. So if you have a mobile phone, you have Google Pay, you have Apple Wallet. I don't know the explicit term. I am an Android user, but you have different digital wallets on your phone, and based on how you use different credentials stored in your wallet, there are a list of potential issues that may result in de-anonymization and a loss of privacy. More specifically, we're looking at a decentralized type of wallet using a technology called verifiable credentials. I won't go into the notion of verifiable credentials, but it's a decentralized way of being able to prove your identity, whereas existing wallets are a federated system where the authentication occurs with a specific company or entity. But anyways, there are a set of different privacy challenges that arise or stem based on how users use their wallet. And these privacy challenges cannot be addressed using cryptographic standards or technological solutions. One such aspect is this notion called unlinkability, which is the ability for attribute providers and relying parties to collude to make sense of a specific user. And again, I won't go into this too much, but different levels, different types of adversarial roles that the relying party and the attribute provider can provide, and then therefore there are different attack vectors or attack scenarios that occur. The unlinkable level 5, which is the highest standard, and this is actually an ISO standard. Believe it or not, there's a specific standard on unlinkability, is when attempts to track user across authentications while these are being controlled in both a read-write scenario from both the relying party and the attribute provider are subverted. So in simplistic terms, if a relying party, which is someone trying to verify you, colludes with the attribute provider, who is the issuer of a specific credential, if they want to try and make sense of who you are, how do you prevent that linkage of your identity or de-anonymization of identity? How do you prevent that? And that's called unlinkability level 5. So we're creating a wallet, and what our publications have done is demonstrate that players who just randomly select their credentials and send it to a verifier, the likelihood of linkability occurring in that situation, which we call a naive game, is significantly higher than a tenable game where we recommend which credentials a user should submit to enhance their privacy. So the black areas that you see is actually stipulates heightened unlinkability, where the lighter areas represent lower levels of unlinkability, which is considered bad. And we've created a game theory model that actually was able to demonstrate this. And based on this, we're in the process of creating a digital credential wallet, which has a recommendations module embedded to enhance the privacy by usage, or addressing the privacy by usage challenges that I've just highlighted just before. Finally, this is my final project, is redefining usable security and physical authentication devices. Despite differences in user attitude and behavior surrounding cybersecurity, there's still not a one-size-fits-all approach to cybersecurity products and services, and especially around the adoption and usage of these such products and services. So the question here is, how good is a cybersecurity product or service that no one knows how to use or no one wants to use? It might provide the highest level of protection, but if it's too complex, too restrictive, and too challenging to set up or use, no one's going to use it, therefore it becomes obsolete. It doesn't matter. So there needs to be a balance, right, between users being able to use the platform and ensuring that there is still a level of security or privacy that's provided by using that product or service. And this is a real challenge because the current literature stipulates that one compromises the other, right? If you make things too usable, then you're doing it at the risk of providing too little security. But if you enhance the security, then you're actually compromising some of the usability features. So when we talk about usability, it's the extent to which a product can be used by specified users to achieve specific goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in a specific context of use. Security, you see the definition below, it's confidential, integrity, and availability of these and strengthening them. There is a plethora of literature on usable security. On the left-hand side, we kind of use this wheel, which is a literature synthesis study that provided us a holistic overview of the definition implied in usable security. So usable security can involve information and support across the service or product, may mean simplicity, it may mean the time, it might mean the number of errors that can be managed, transparency, et cetera, and so on and so forth. So we use this as kind of the framework of our study to examine things called physical authentication devices, and you might have come across these called YubiKeys or Google Titan keys. What we did was we wanted to see how different people experience setting up and using these physical authentication devices. And what we did was we sent each user a different box with different features involved. And then we gathered people's perceptions on what their thoughts were on these devices. And how do they think about the usability features and the security aspects? Do they really think that this provided additional levels of security? How easy did they find to use it? And will they use it continuously on moving forward? And what you see is you see different configurations because we wanted to test the viability of different configurations based on different users. So our first study involved sending out a survey, which involves 410 users. We had different demographic groups involving different age groups. So up here you see B1 refers to the age group between 18 to 29. B2 refers to 30 to 45-year-olds. B3 is 46 to 60, and then B4 is a group of 60 plus. On the left-hand side, you'll see people with no qualification in IT, no experience using such devices. A2 refers to no qualification in ICT, and they have experience using pads, so on and so forth. So each group was then categorized. We sent them a questionnaire, which asked them a series of questions. And on the right, you'll see that that each group, which involves 16 groups, all had a different level of emphasis when it comes to what they found important when it came to usable security. So the age demographic between 18 to 21, stipulated that interference, the design and the quality of the device was the most important. Whereas those 60 and above said, well, if I'm going to use a device, it needs to be well documented and supported. I need a lot of information to set this up. So what we are seeing here is that the user characteristic actually directly has an implication on what users consider to be the most important usable security traits. Interestingly enough, everyone said the least important was who produced the device. So I'm assuming there's no dominant brand involved that is generally well known across the sector. So perception was considered the least important. Our subsequent study actually sent these devices to a group of 25 odd users and then got them to play around with it for a month create a log, and then we did a semi-structured interview at the end of the study. And what we found was that these are their their general sentiment or attitude towards the device at the end of the study. So those with no experience considered, yep, 53% said, yep, it was positive. I really like the devices. 47% said, nah, it wasn't really great. Those with experience, again, very similar. Education didn't affect it too much. Interestingly enough, gender in this particular study, did have a significant impact on users' perspective towards these devices. But the most important impactful attribute was actually age. So those in the younger group cohort, 65% actually found it to be a positive experience, whereas that figure completely dissipates to 20% or around 20% for elder groups. So what this implies is that the sentiment or the benefit or the attitude towards these devices are, again, dictated based on different demographic and different user attributes. We broke this down a little bit more further. On the right-hand side, you'll see what they consider to be the most important usable security features. So, for example, here you'll see that compatibility and information and support was considered to be the most important usable security features for those with no experience. With those with experience, it was roughly the same. So if you look through these things, you'll see roughly there isn't too much discrepancy across what they consider to be important usable security features, also, although there are slight variants around graphical user interface, for example. But again, age had a significant bearing on the breakdown of the most important usable security features. Again, this all implies that our approach to human-centric cybersecurity must not categorize people and users into one segment or group. And I think that's a common criticism or a limitation that I've seen across much of the cybersecurity literature that I've come across to. And it's something that I genuinely believe needs a multidisciplinary approach to resolve. So finally, final comment. Dr. Bruce Schneider is a New York Times bestselling author and also an academic at Harvard University. And he said many years ago, only amateurs attack machines, professionals target people. So with that, thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions or thoughts, or again, if you have any constructive criticism towards my work, I'm happy to listen to that as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Jay. That was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And I'll now open to our chat or any of the present participants. If they have any question, please unmute yourself. And yeah, I think Jonathan has one of the comment in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So he mentioned one of the issues with multi-factor authentication, that they are quite clunky and doesn't always work that well.
Mm-hmm.
So is it part of usability issue? So because we have multiple devices, but
right.
not in use simultaneously. So usability is one of the factors he mentioned.
Sure. No. So within the usable security, that's called adaptability. And in our study, we explicitly used a device with Bluetooth. We used one with USB-A, and then we had another device which was USB-C compatible. And yes, it was definitely an issue. The interface, for example, Apple phones don't have access to USB-A, and the Bluetooth device didn't integrate well with Apple devices. Similarly, certain laptops had issues with the USB-C type. So once again, and we've spoken to some of the large manufacturers, and we're devising additional studies in this space, Jonathan. But what we're finding is that when they actually tested these devices, they used students explicitly as their usable security testbed group. And if you recall the study, the underlying importance of usable security was considerably different between age groups, right? So that was a flaw that they had in their development and design aspects of the devices. And hopefully that's something that someone can address and something that will be addressed moving forward. But yes, definitely adaptability is a critical issue.
Thanks, Jay. Jonathan, if you want to add something into it, please go ahead. Yeah, we have two more questions. So Khalid, thank you for the presentation. In the studies highlighted, have you found any perception difference based on culture or background? Have you
Yes,
considered this
so
factor? Yeah.
absolutely. So I'll give you an example with the OCSC study. So Western Samoa and Tonga. In most people's minds, those are two very small Pacific Island nations that many would believe share similar cultural backgrounds or traits. But in essence, they're actually two very different nations in general. So Tonga is actually a monarchy. They have a king. And within the Pacific Island region, Tonga was known from historical past to be a warmongering nation. They used to be the most fearless tribe that would invade or raid other islands. Western Samoa is actually based on a Westminster system similar to Australia, New Zealand, Britain. They have a prime minister. But in essence, their actual leaders aren't their political leaders. It's their religious leaders because it's a deeply Christian state. So when we talked about cybersecurity in these two countries, Tonga was all about we can't allow people to defame our king, and everything around their cybersecurity policies and procedures was based on misinformation and trying to limit the amount of information that's spread through social media. Whereas in Western Samoa, their approach to cybersecurity is banning pornography, banning illicit content and materials. Right? So based on their cultural background, their perception of cybersecurity changes, which actually molds or actually has a direct implication on the policies, procedures, and legislations that put in place. So coming back to your question, yes, there is a significant difference, although that work is quite challenging. And again, if that's an area of interest, please feel free to reach out because I'd love to learn more.
Yep, that's a great analysis. I think perception is one of the biggest factor in understanding the cyber threat. So we have one more question from Tracy. Have you come across or have done any work on the organization group of effects, on smaller sizes, medium and small businesses?
Yep. So a lot of yes. So organization size is important because it has a direct implication on the resources available to that organization. We often as cybersecurity academics don't realize that in the real world, we're always bound by limited resources. And when I talk about resources, it's not just about money, but access to skilled personnel and the equipment and the products and services that larger organizations might have access to. And one of my focuses is on how do we create a cyber instilled culture within smaller organizations and units who have limited resources. So I'm working with a group of ex-masters and PhD students that I used to supervise on creating a platform that makes setup programs much more easily accessible to those smaller groups dynamics.
Yep. So yeah, thanks for the questions. I would like, because we still have 10 minutes to go. Okay. So we have one more question from Jonathan. Do you think cyber crime is basically the con, but the cyber tech is pretty dynamic and that continues to create new opportunities for crime? So yeah, I think the question is pretty long, so I can elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, but I think the gist of it is that the evolution of cybercrime is always 5 steps ahead of certain groups that might be disproportionate or disadvantaged, right? And yes, it's making it easier, but I think people are, and this is where the awareness part becomes really important. And I always use this term. The elderly are more susceptible to believing what they read and see online than the youth. And generally, they're much more trustworthy. So the likelihood of you being conned actually becomes zero if you don't trust anything. So there needs to be a level of cynicism instilled in elder demographic groups. But in saying that, subsequently, we will become older as time goes by. So the group of people, our generation, the generations prior to us, will be less susceptible to these attacks, 2 or 3 decades from now. But I'm sure when that time comes, the techniques that are used are going to be much more sophisticated than now. So it's always kind of a sword and shield problem where you have the bigger shield and then you have the bigger sword. But I think that we'll see a decrease in those type of con-based schemes as we go time. It may not seem like it, but it will dissipate over time.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, I recently have an encounter with one of my students who belonged to the elderly group. So we were working on blockchain-based wallets. These were test wallets. And I mentioned him not to use his personal addresses while logging in, but he said it's too much of headache for him. There are so many passwords he needs to remember. So he's just going with one password for everything. So yeah, I think it's tricky for them to, come up with passwords and use multiple websites and devices.
I struggle remembering 5 passwords myself.
Yes. So even though we are technically aware, but still it's a bit of a headache.
Right.
So yeah, any more question from our audience for Jay? Okay. So if not, Jay, I have one question. So you have done, quite an extensive research on the human factors involved. I'm a little bit interested. Have you figured out what are the human-centric issues involved in the cybercrime that are conducted in Australia?
So, did you know that people up in Queensland are 3 times more likely to be part of a romance scam or a financial crime scam than those in Victoria and New South Wales?
Okay, I wasn't aware, yes.
The reason why is that the inherent culture in Queensland is that they have a very trustworthy demeanor.
Okay.
It's very much more relaxed, a lot less scrutiny across who you're talking to. And there was a documentary, a 60 Minutes program, which was a call center scam operation in the Philippines. And they were explicitly targeting people from Queensland only.
So they figured that
out. 5 Americans and 4 Aussies based out of the Philippines. They were making $250,000 a week scamming people, those in Queensland, with financial schemes. The whole reason why these people believed or fell into the scam was that they were using Australian-based mobile numbers and Australian-based bank accounts. So it's very simple things. And remember that they're Americans and Aussies, so they were speaking with a localized accent.
Yeah.
That people were much more less likely to scrutinize or have their guard up. It doesn't take much to get people to believe in you if you understand that those are only small specific things that can trigger a person to believe you online or not. Now imagine the use of AI, deepfake videos or voice recognition software 2 or 3 years from now. How are you going to be able to distinguish if it's your mom or not?
Yeah.
How do we protect ourselves from those type of attacks? As researchers, those are questions that we should be posing ourselves, rather than, in my humble opinion, looking at the deep mechanics, because we are not even close to solving any of the high level issues, but irrespective of what we believe or not, right? People don't operate like machines. I think one of the biggest flaws is that we treat people like machines, where it's a 0 or 1 state, without realizing there's an infinite number of shades of gray in between 0 and 1, or black and white. And often when you come up with solutions from a cybersecurity researcher's perspective, it either works or it doesn't work. But then I pose the question, if something improves something by 20%, isn't that a significant improvement over what we're doing now? And I think we need to start transitioning our mindset to that facet, rather than being stuck in with the silver bullet that's going to solve everything at once, because no such solution exists. And if it does exist, it'll be circumvented within a year.
Yep.
But that's just me. That's just some food for thought.
No, I think you're right, that the aspect that we treat humans as machine, and that's how, as cybersecurity analysts, and especially the engineers, come up with the solutions, maybe keeping that in mind is a challenge. So yeah, a lot of creativity in the cybercrime community.
Yeah, but the problem is the research community is not keeping up with that creativity, Jonathan. That's probably my biggest concern. Thinking outside the box is difficult for academia when we are in a position where we have to hit targets with academic publications in specific venues. We have teaching loads, right? We have a whole raft of different criteria to meet. Where are we given the space to be creative with our solutions? And that's something that we probably need to, and that's a challenge that all of us, irrespective of who we're affiliated with, all of us in academia should be thinking about a little bit more in detail.
Yeah, I think that's a concern for all of us as academics. So yeah, we have 3 more minutes. So if anyone wants to ask, I think we're more than happy. Jay would be more than happy to have a conversation with him. You can contact him on his email, and we'll provide you this recorded session as well. So Jay, just on the ending note, what do you think we can do to make people aware, especially in Australia, about these cyber crimes?
Be empathetic.
Yeah.
I see a lot of victimization. How can you be that stupid to click on that link? How can it's you've created this by yourself by not doing or following standard practices. We have often that type of mentality towards those who have been victimized by these crimes. Be a little bit more empathetic, because the psychological distress and stress and the harm that this causes to people who have actually been the victim of these crimes is significantly more than what we think it is.
Yep.
So when you're talking about these subject matters, do it with an open mind, open heart, and a little bit more empathy.
That's a great answer. So hopefully we can move towards a better society where we empathize with the people who are victim of it and come up with more solutions to avoid such challenges in future. So thank you again, Jay, for an amazing talk.
Yeah, appreciate everyone having to bear with me for an hour listening to me speak. I hope there is some important stuff that you can take away. And again, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, send me an email. I'd love to collaborate with my colleagues at RMIT if there's a given opportunity to do so.
Wonderful, wonderful. We would also like to have you again once you complete your research and present more about these human factors involved in cybersecurity. So yeah, on this note, I think we can close the session. So anyone who would like to have the access to the slides or the recording, that would be provided. So thank you so much, Jay, again.
Cool. Akanksha, can I spare 2 minutes of your time afterwards? Just as a quick debrief, thanks.
Yes, sure.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.